Hello, it's Andy and Luann, your favourite social media double act, back again. Thank you so much for joining. There is a lot to cover today, as there always is, and we are very excited to cover it, basically. So, Luann, do you want to do a quick intro before we crack on?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you if you're returning. Hello if you're new to this session. I'm based in the Cotswolds, the nice part of the UK. It's quite sunny today. I'm a marketing consultant running my own business, working from home, and I have a really nice mix of working directly with clients, mainly on social media, but also on more general marketing planning as well. I work with, right now, law firms, universities, manufacturers, financial services, and I also have a nice mix of training and teaching as well, from live events like this to recorded events that you can find my courses on LinkedIn Learning. I'm one of their course instructors, and I'm also an accredited lead blueprint trainer for Facebook and Instagram. So very much live in a social media world like you.
Indeed, probably like everyone else on this session as well. And thank you already. The chat is lighting up. Good morning, Heather, Claire, Talia.
Hello,
Eric.
Hello, Eric.
So much going on. Yeah, absolutely. I love the chat lit up last time. So yeah, absolutely use that. And one thing just to mention in chat, one thing that worked really well, because we kind of instigated this at the end of last session, people started putting in their LinkedIn profile links as well, so we can all connect afterwards, because we want to continue this conversation and share, our knowledge and learning. So if you want to connect on LinkedIn with others on this call, because typically most of us on this call at least have a shared interest and passion in social media, so pop your LinkedIn links and we can all connect. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start the presentation, because a lot to cover. So this is a fun one. I've been looking forward to this one for a while, actually. So
data. That's what we've got today.
Indeed. Very, very data heavy. So so we already know who Luann is. So she is, she's the more interesting one of this session, of the double act, I would say. But unfortunately, you're going to have to hear from me first. I'm one of the founding team of Content Cal. Given my background, you'd have no idea who I represent, would you? Fully branded up today. Anyway, I'm on the founding team and Content Cal. We're not going to talk about it today. The only thing you need to know is that it's a content planning and management tool, and it's now been recognized as the fastest growing in the world, which is very, very exciting. So very proud about that. Anyway, now to the interesting bit. Let's start with the trends. Lots going on. And we had the privilege this month of Luann and I geeking out over global web indexes, twice yearly report. So there's about 350 pages of analysis of everything that happens over the course of the internet. Now, not everyone is sad enough to pour over 350 odd pages, other than your two hosts here. So we kind of pulled out the stuff you need to know. Right, digital around the world. So I'll lead this kind of conversation. Luann, chime in.
I'm checking the chat.
And chime in for any other things that you want to add. But ultimately, digital has grown. If we look at total population, mobile phone users, internet users, and active social media users, sometimes it's hard to comprehend how big these numbers are. But the fact that active social media users is closing in on the number of total internet users is kind of crazy. So it's unbelievable. But as these numbers are so hard to kind of really contextualize, because they are so big, it's actually easier to contextualize it through growth rates. Because if you look at like total population and mobile phone usage growth, etc., I want to draw your attention to the right-hand side, which is 13.2% growth of social media usage. That's nearly 500 million people added in the last year. Utterly massive. And of course, situations beyond anyone's control has led that to be the case, but it's continued to grow, and it's actually starting to speed up the growth of social media users. So unbelievable. Like we're definitely talking in the right market right now. But of course, with the growth of these social media users, that growth is kind of disseminated across the multiple platforms. Now we show this kind of data. We try and keep a track of this every single month, but it's sometimes hard to. So let's look at some year-on-year growth here. Facebook has stayed fairly static, but it's still the biggest in terms of monthly active users. So these monthly active users is the most important metric to know, not like total user numbers, because we want to track the people that log into these platforms every single day, because they become more of our addressable audience, if you will. So Facebook stayed fairly static. YouTube has grown by about 15%. It was 2 billion on the nose monthly active users. So 15% growth of YouTube. It's doing very, very well at the moment. It's growing faster than Facebook. Often talk about YouTube being a missing piece of many people's social media strategies. And we'll talk more about YouTube later, but really good growth there. Next, I want to kind of draw your attention to, I won't talk about every single one here, but Instagram's been a fantastic story. 25% growth year on year at Instagram in monthly active users. They're doing really well. And in fact, whilst the media always talk about the growth of TikTok, it's actually slowed a little bit. TikTok's not going anywhere as a platform. There's 689 million monthly active users. It's massive. But, that kind of like ridiculous rocket ship growth always slows down at some point. You'll obviously notice a lot of networks that won't necessarily be immediately familiar to you, because this is kind of the worldwide, not necessarily native to the Western world. But two other things to call out here. Pinterest continues to grow really strong, as does Reddit. Reddit is something that's used very heavily in the US, less so in the UK. And it's one of the only platforms that has not peaked in terms of its monthly active users. It gets bigger and bigger each time. So very interesting one for me, Reddit. And Luann, you want to call out something about LinkedIn?
Yeah, when we shared this, whenever we share this slide or you put it on a post and say this is what we're going to talk about, the question always comes up, where's LinkedIn? LinkedIn is a smaller platform, but obviously has a bit more of a specific use for B2B. And the latest figures that I could find of where this would come in terms of relation to the other numbers would be 260 million monthly active users. So they've got 760 users totally, 260 monthly active users, and about 40% of LinkedIn users are logging in every day. So LinkedIn is there as a platform, and it is part of this presentation as well. But I would kind of caveat this, that it's great to know monthly active users as the number we're looking at, rather than just how many people have an account. But of course, we don't necessarily need to play where the most people are. We need to play where our audiences are. Amen.
Yes. Very good. So then let's kind of go a bit deeper into this, because I love this data point. And every time that I see a refresh of this data, I really love it, because it's something we don't think about or look at too much when we're thinking about our social media strategies. So we know like social media clearly has grown very quickly over the year, and we can see the platforms that have grown the quickest. But of course, these users are kind of split across multiple platforms, and many people, and clearly nearly 100% of people, use another platform, right? So the most important thing to take away from this is the importance of a multi-channel strategy. I'll ask for your input in a second, actually, on this, Luann, and your thoughts. But I'll call out one point as an example, right? So imagine that you have an Instagram first strategy, and like your social media strategy leans heavily on Instagram. What would make a great deal of sense, if you look at the kind of the penetration of the users that use other social networking apps, it would be very prudent to consider YouTube as part of your strategy as well, because there is a nearly 95% user overlap. Because if we want to maximize the chances of people seeing our content, we should think in multi-channel, and putting it in two channels quite clearly doubles the chance of your potential target audience seeing your content or your message. Any other thoughts on this one, Luann?
Yeah, there's a couple of things. One, I love this as well. It's not a single platform that we can focus on. We actually have to balance our resources, don't we? As much as we might want to try and do everything, we can't do all of them. So we still do need to have some focus. I'd love to see this as actually some Venn diagrams and circles of overlapping, rather than just some raw numbers, because I think that'd be easier for us to understand. So maybe if we are getting geeky, we might play with this data. For me, I think there's a key point in here around, we do need to use more than one platform. But the question that often comes up in training is around, so do I post exactly the same thing on every platform? And the answer is no, because there is nuances. It stands out a mile if you take an Instagram post with 30 hashtags and put it on Facebook. So even though we're encouraging you to use this slide and use more than one platform, please don't just do the same thing on every platform. That you do need to kind of tweak and adjust, because the audiences, as we're going to look at, are slightly different. Use more, but focus and adapt.
Indeed. So let's go into like how people are using social media for brand research, which, as most of us are representing brands or people that are managing brands on behalf of them, this is a really interesting slide. We're not going to go through all of it. I'm just going to focus on the top two. Search and social are the two predominant channels of people discovering brands or products for the first time and doing their research within that. So search and social, and what we're seeing, and we see this every single year that we look at this, that social networks tend to get a bigger share of the search traffic, and really where people are starting to find products for the first time is happening more on social than just search. But if we dive into this in a bit more detail, because don't get me wrong, I'm not suggesting everyone abandons their SEO strategy based on this data. But what does start to come out actually is like there's a key kind of like demographic opportunity here, is that for your younger demographics, search, social rather, becomes the predominant brand research channel, and it starts to become bigger than search. So it's a very kind of demographic bias. And as you can see, that chart slipping downwards where, you know, the older demographic naturally will gravitate more towards search. So the interesting thing for our strategies and what we can take away from that is that how we're prioritizing our social media content marketing efforts alongside our broader, you know, content marketing efforts that are geared towards search engine ranking. So our SEO ultimate strategy, and making sure that that is in line. Like if we're targeting an older demographic, yes, we want to be thinking more about SEO first. But actually, if we're thinking about a younger demographic, we need to give social media an adequate weighting alongside our kind of long form content strategy. That's what I take from this, Luann. I don't know if you interpret it in any other way.
I do. And if you can just pop back a second to the slide before, when I was looking at this one, for me, whether or not you believe in the marketing funnel as a model, I do to a certain extent. For me, this also kind of almost mirrors the marketing funnel as well, with, you know, awareness, our traffic is coming, our early adopters, you know, from search engines and social networks. And then as people are going through that customer journey and towards the, you know, ready to buy, yes, they are looking for how-to videos, they're looking for product blogs, they're looking for Q&A, they're looking for a discount voucher. So for me, it kind of mirrors that marketing funnel in the customer journey, and shows us where search and social really fit into that as well. I do believe it's important all the way through, but particularly important at that awareness stage.
That's really interesting, actually, because that absolutely, I didn't look at it in that way, that it does map that funnel, absolutely, because, you know, the layers of intent get stronger as you go further down that. So people looking for a discount voucher clearly have the highest purchase intent, but right at the top, So it's really important as well. We talk about this lots about where social media plays in your strategy, and it's absolutely at that top of the funnel, that discovery phase. So we've already spoken about the demographics, but this goes further into those demographics as well, and helps us kind of prioritize search and social, make sure we've got a balanced mix of our strategies, because actually if the preference to find brands through social media is actually geared towards more of a female demographic, interestingly, so based on this data. So actually we can, depending on who we're trying to target, we can start to alternate our strategies or try and define our strategies with a real good degree of rigor to say, actually, do we have a good balance between our SEO focused strategy and our social media first focused strategy? So it's a nice way of balancing it. Because talking of balance, and it's kind of interesting this, because when you look at it from a B2B perspective, so this data is actually from a different source. I took this data from a survey of 1,500 technology B2B marketers. So basically people in a very similar position to myself. And this question was about what channels have grown in importance for B2B brands. Clearly webinars was by far and away the winner, you know, as we're doing right now. But actually it shows an interesting kind of split between what we've just been talking about, how social is becoming more important in brand research terms, but actually a B2B brand weights social media joint fourth as to the channels that are most important. So either B2B brands are thinking about it in a different way, or potentially slightly behind the curve when it comes to their marketing strategies. Two ways I look at that. I'm curious about your thoughts on this one, Luann.
I think all of these come into play, don't they, really? Again, you know, you can't, you know, we're talking about social media on this webinar, but there is life outside social media, and other platforms and channels do work. I do think email marketing is incredibly important for B2B. And again, if you could almost turn this funnel upside down, couldn't you? Because we're doing webinars right now, which is kind of quite broad content. How did we communicate? Social media, email, backwards and forwards. Did we run some ads? We didn't this time, but we might for other events. And I know that you do for other events. They're all important. It's, again, understanding where our customers are in the journey, what data we've captured, and the balance of information as well. So I wouldn't rule any of them out. It's just level of importance for different tasks.
Indeed. So I think it's just the thing I took away from this actually was like, so many B2B brands weight their long form content strategy far higher than they would do their social media strategy. But it just goes to show those times are shifting a little bit when you look at the demographic information and how people are weighting or starting to turn towards social for brand discovery. And that's really interesting, which kind of leads to this point. So 66% increase in discovery of products through social in the last 4 years, which basically encapsulates what we've just been talking about for the last 10 minutes, really. Hugely important. And so I want to give you one last trend before we actually deep dive into the networks and start talking about, the benchmarks within each individual social platform and the changes that they've made. So this is the last of the kind of, monthly trend stuff. So as the saying goes, for the next big trend, look down to your mobile basically and look and look east. So that's typically where the trends happen. So if you want to start getting ahead of the curve, always look what's happening eastwards. So predominantly in this instance in China. So sorry for the wordy slide, but this is a really interesting case study, which if you're interested in this, I would recommend you doing further reading on. But ultimately Chinese New Year, watched by, the gala is watched by over 1 billion people, as you could expect. And naturally, this provides an incredible platform for a certain individual that China really want to promote. Now, that person that they wanted to kind of give a platform to for the New Year's gala was Via, who's known as China's live stream queen. And that is a statement of intent from China about the importance of live stream, and most particularly live stream e-commerce. So there's some data points here, and we'll talk more about this story in a second. But like as of March 2020, 560 million people watching shopping live streams, a huge increase of 126 million. China's live stream e-commerce market's 170 billion, up from 66 billion. It's essentially like the social media alternative, like of a shopping channel, of like QVC. It's kind of nuts, really, when you think about it. But like Via, who is, as we just said, China's live stream queen, has been given this platform, and she has made her billions from shopping, like live stream e-commerce. And now China have realized that as a potential to rebuild the battered economy, where they're relying on these influencers with huge followings, working with like local agriculture businesses and farming communities to merchandise and market their products through live streamed e-commerce, which I think is an incredibly progressive way to think about rebuilding an economy. And no wonder China is such a superpower on the world stage, because that's such a forward-thinking approach. And it just goes to show, how progressive sometimes, for the foibles, not going to talk about all geopolitics right now, but there are, for one thing that you can say about China, how they start to understand, interpret tech and build tech into how they create their economies. So powerful. So yeah, I really wanted to highlight this, because when we go into the trends and the changes that networks are making, you're going to start to see them leaning towards this and recognizing this trend and this big shift that is in front of us. Thoughts on that, Lauren?
Sorry, I don't have anything to add to that. I'm just really watching the live chat, and there's loads of questions coming in there, so we will come to them. I'm going to go through the questions, but sorry, it just made me laugh because it said, is anyone over 40 working in social media? Yes. So now everyone's putting their ages, so sorry, I'm slightly distracted, but yeah, really important, and the trends and what's happening. So yeah, we've got LinkedIn threads and now ages going in there, so keep that chat going. We will come to your questions.
Wicked. Love it. So right, you get a break from my voice.
Yeah. What's new?
Let's go to Facebook.
Yeah, let's look through these individual platforms, and again, we've got some data for each. I'm not going to read out every slide. We can give you the links to this, and you will get a copy of the recording afterwards. I find these stats are always really useful at the stage where you're planning, at the stage where you're trying to present your plans to other people to say, is this the platform we should be using? Is it not? How does this match our target audience? And I think what's always important, as we've said already, is not just looking at the raw numbers, but looking at growth and where things are growing as well. quarter on quarter change in Facebook's ad reach. For these stats, it's growing. As we probably, not as I would expect on Facebook, that the audience is skewing towards male on Facebook right now. In my experience previously, it's always skewed female. So that's interesting how that's changed overall. Not just gender, it's age as well. So it is also, as we can see here, skewing towards our younger groups, which people might find quite strange on Facebook. You'd think it was an older place. It's you don't want to join it when you're younger because your mum and dad are there, but people are joining this. And I find, I do a lot of work in education and universities, and I find that actually when there is a purpose for people to join Facebook, whether it's a freshers group, whether it's their study groups, whether it's sports groups, actually that's when Facebook comes into its own, and we do get that advertising audience, which we're seeing right here.
Agreed.
Changing. Yes, it's changing. It's changing all the time. We wouldn't be doing these webinars every month if there wasn't change in the stats and the data. So I guess what this is meaning is if you have an ad strategy, if you have a social media plan, you need to keep updating it. And for me, this annual report that comes out in January is where I'd always go back to and review my data.
Yeah, and it's very interesting, like how I think this will have been as a result of the pandemic, but you can see the age range skewing dramatically further to the right-hand side of this graph here. So yeah, really interesting to see a much nicer balance towards social rather than it just being, oh, it's for teenagers or younger people. Actually, it's as we can see from the overarching numbers, it's a platform that connects cross demographics now. And I think that's a really good story to have come. One silver lining we can take from the last year or so. Yeah,
the communities that have kind of engaged using Facebook, that's been their focus, but it's been what people have needed as well. So
indeed,
this one's interesting, the country by country breakdown. Don't know if anyone is working globally or not. There is also loads of global stats in here. We're not going to talk about these country by country, but to look at UK in equal 12th position, that there isn't a growth percentage quarter on quarter in terms of reach for the UK. So I think that's another really interesting stat on this slide.
Definitely. And it's one thing to note, actually, if you note that, kind of make a mental note of that 38 million number, because that's going to be very interesting when we look at this same data across different platforms in a sec, actually. So call that. Yeah, benchmarks.
Benchmarks. I love this. And I know I've got a friend watching on this. And I will go back to my early days of when I worked in direct mail, and we would also always plan our campaigns based on expected return rates and percentages. And we haven't always had those for social media. We haven't always had those benchmarks of what engagement rates can we expect, what response rates can we expect. So it's great to see some stats coming through in these reports now. It's an average across all industries, it's an average across the world. So take these as you need to, maybe as a guide for whether you're above average or below average, or just purely for your planning. But what these show, if you get a chance to dive into the data afterwards, that actually all content is engaging. And my take on this is usually have your idea first, then decide the best form of content to communicate that idea. Don't focus solely on, I think video, everything's got to be video. It's about the content and the quality of the content, not necessarily about the form.
Exactly. And I think that is the key point, actually. The format is not the key element here. It's the quality of content. So that's a really important point you made. And I think the only other thing to mention on this is like the way that this engagement rate has been calculated isn't as the way that I would like to see engagement rate calculated, because for me, engagement rate is better calculated of reach divided by engagement. This is total page fans divided by engagement. So this naturally will then show a much smaller metric. So if you look at your engagement rates, you might be like, oh, right, I'm 5 and 7%. But just so you know, if you really want to track your benchmark, your engagement rate against this data here, what you need to do is look at your total followers of your page and then divide that by your engagements. So your likes, shares, reactions, comments, etc. So just a point on data.
So lots of numbers, use the data how you need to. This as a recent update, I think is really important. The challenges when it comes to advertising, online campaigns, planning is around control and managing your brand reputation. So Facebook are testing and rolling out ads topic exclusion, which basically means if you're running ads, you're going to get more control around where your ad is and isn't displayed alongside, which, given world events and what's happening, I think, I'm a bit of a control freak. So for me, the more control options I've got, the better.
Agreed.
And this is an interesting one, even though I did say earlier about, don't do the same thing on every platform. We do know, I don't know about you, I've got notifications going off right now on my email, on my WhatsApp, on Clubhouse, on notifications. If I could have them all in one place, that would be wonderful. Can't have them all in one place, but the more that can go together, and I can find and work between the platforms as Facebook and Instagram are doing, I think that's welcome for many of us that are using multiple platforms.
Definitely. Instagram. Yeah, Instagram. So Instagram's had a good quarter, 63 million growth compared to Facebook's 44. So it is outpacing Facebook in terms of growth. Skews slightly more females we'd expect, although not at the kind of rate that I would have expected, actually, which is interesting. Very similar age demographics to Facebook, actually, which I think in itself is quite interesting, because typically you might look at, as you said, Luann, like Facebook skews slightly older, but actually demographic is a very similar. If you put a line chart to this, it would look very, very similar to Facebook, actually, from a demographic. But the growth is actually a really balanced approach. So unlike Facebook, where, as you said, like it's not growing in the younger demographic, but it is in the older, it's a much more balanced split, actually. So I would expect to see 18 to 34 being like the lowest kind of growth area, because that's the kind of predominance of the user base at the moment. But it's growing in the younger and older demographic. So a really nice broad reach within Instagram. Like I said, we were going to come back to this data. So in terms of reach, UK ranks 9th, so really high, and it's grown very well, 10%. 31 million is the potential UK reach. Compare that to Facebook's 38 million. It's not massively far behind that. So just goes to show this is like the opportunity that you have within, if you're focusing on a UK audience. Sorry that we're very heavily UK, because I know we've got people from across the world on this, but just to give you a bit of a benchmark, goes to show that when you start interrogating the data at this level, you start to get some interesting findings. A couple of benchmarks, like Luann, you already perfectly articulated, is like this is a benchmark, it's a guide, it's not a rule book. So average growth in followers month on month across all accounts is 1.68%. So if you're growing more than 2% really, or around 2% per month in your follower growth, you're doing well. Average post per day, always get asked questions about how many times per day should I post, but there is not a definitive answer to that, but typically between 1 and 2, if you really want to know what the rest of the world are doing. But
consistently is my answer to that question.
That is the one. That is the one. So, yeah, engagement benchmarks. It is about 700% higher than Facebook. So reach is still it's still diminishing on Instagram, and it will diminish over time. That's just the sad reality of organic reach. That being said, it's still 700% better than Facebook. So, but as you can see, just like we saw with Facebook, actually, there isn't a huge swing between the different content formats. Yes, carousels are a bit more engaging. Interestingly, videos do the worst, which is kind of fascinating findings for me. But ultimately, it's about the same ultimately. So, like the guidance was before, focus on the message, and then the kind of the platform, and then the last thing you need to think about is the format of it, really. So multi-person live stream. Sorry for the random screenshot. This is taken from a Facebook press release. I have no idea what's actually going on in this screenshot. But ultimately, what it's trying to articulate is the fact you can run an Instagram live with multiple people. So you can run a kind of webinar like we're doing with Luann and myself on Instagram Live. Another way to really engage a community and interact in live life. Opens up a huge plethora of collaborative opportunities to go live with other people, to expand your audience by working collaboration. I love this as a concept. Anything that encourages working with others and sharing and building community in real time, absolutely love it. Don't often talk about Shopify because it's not a social media network, but it's actually really important to kind of bring this up, because we've spoken a lot about e-commerce at the start, and we talk about e-commerce because that's the thing that's growing the quickest, and we talk about it every month as a result. But this Shopify Shop Pay really starts to lower the barrier of entry for merchants that want to start selling stuff in the UK, and using social to do that. So this then creates a really nice seamless experience. So let's kind of play out a pretend scenario. Let's say you put out a feed post on Instagram or Facebook, right? Because this applies to both of them. You can tag the product, as we've known from previous sessions. You can use product tags. When someone clicks on that product tag because they've seen a video or a Instagram live where you've got this studio bag and someone's like, oh, that looks nice. Click on that link, will take them to this page, which allows that person to add that to cart, which will then open Shopify, two similar names, Shopify Shop Pay, which allows people to make that purchase in that moment. And the nice thing about Shopify Shop Pay allows those users to save the card details, making it much simpler for people to purchase products without having to register on a new platform or put in their card details again. So they can just pop it in, make their order, and they're returned straight back to the Instagram feed. A really perfect scenario of like how someone can start to merchandise their content and start to drive commerce through their content. And that in itself is a really interesting manifestation and a perfect manifestation of what we've been talking about, like the 66% growth of discovery of products through social, how e-commerce is growing. And really, that is how you implement it. So this is available now. So it's definitely worthwhile checking out if you're in a position to start merchandising your products through social. Big one here. Deprioritizing content share from other apps. Mostly this is a stab at TikTok, where on TikTok you could make your TikTok video and then you could share that to Instagram. They are putting a stop to that. This is only a matter of time, but ultimately, unless that content is created natively on Instagram Reels, it's not going to do very well. So unfortunately, that adds a bit more heavy lifting to our content strategies because, like you said earlier, Luann, content needs to be created for that platform to appeal to that platform's demographic, and not just to the audience, but it also needs to be created for that platform to kind of pander to the network itself as well. So don't reshare stuff to Instagram from other apps. It won't do well at all. So
it's really interesting that I think they've made that very clear as well, particularly with a new feature that is so similar to another one that they've tried to make that really clear. And it'll be interesting in the next few weeks to see the stats on Reels in particular and if that's had any impact.
Yeah, I agree, definitely. Over to you again, Luann. LinkedIn. Let's talk about LinkedIn. So again, more stats, similar comments really. LinkedIn is increasing. They have released, all the platforms do their quarterly stats and announcements, and that LinkedIn within Microsoft, their stats are sat within them. Record levels of engagement, new users, as we might possibly expect on LinkedIn, it is skewed more towards male. Plenty of females on there as well, so don't worry about that. And it is interesting where it sits in the demographics as well, this 25 to 34 age group. Maybe it's more visible right now because of the perception that LinkedIn is about jobs and recruitment. It's obviously so much more than that, but that could be, I know this is the demographic that has been hit particularly hard right now in terms of recruitment. So there's your audiences. And as we saw on that B2B, slide of where people are focusing, LinkedIn ads was coming quite high as a channel on there. So it is worth a look at. Agreed.
Search rankings, where are we on here in terms of UK? We're 5. So, we are growing in the UK on LinkedIn reach.
And yeah, that's 30 million compared to Instagram's 31 million. So even though it just goes to show, like when you look at the kind of monthly active users from a global perspective, as we did right at the start, when you start to dive into the UK specifics, actually there isn't a massive gap between Instagram, LinkedIn and Facebook. I found that very interesting.
Yeah. Depending on where your audiences are as well, they may, you may be outside the UK, but important to look at the data.
Indeed.
I think this is the only change we've got to talk about for LinkedIn this month. They announced this just at the end of last week about a marketplace for freelancers, for people to go and find freelancers. They have a similar feature at the moment. I think it's called Pro Finder, but these things kind of start in the US before they roll out to other countries. This is in line with stats that maybe with what's happening in the economy, the way people are working, that perhaps there is more opportunities for freelancers and contractors right now. So LinkedIn is tapping into that to help organizations find those additional resources. So this will involve me. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this one rolls out.
Me too.
Twitter in their last quarter stats, I think they used the word, we've had an extraordinary year. It was positive, but they used the word extraordinary because it was positive despite so many challenges around the election, and obviously that key person that is missing from our social media worlds right now, that we can't go and have a look at what he's got to say. But, stats are still increasing in terms of quarterly reach, in terms of Twitter ads. I think they're making some changes to the Twitter advertising platform. I'm seeing a lot more ads in my feed. So that'll be an interesting one to see where people go on that. A big skew towards males in terms of Twitter users. So that's really interesting. My hope for Twitter, as much as I'm a huge fan, is that I always saw success on it with events. I can see people are tweeting right now, and hopefully, as we know, we now have this roadmap. Events may come live again later in the year. It's fine online, but obviously we're watching screens and multitasking. I always found that live events were brilliant for business and use on Twitter. So we'll have to watch how that happens later in the year.
Agreed.
The audience, yeah, you had the gender split there, as we've already said, quite heavily male, but overall, slightly older perhaps than our other platforms on there. Twitter reach rankings, we're fourth. Slight drop, minus 1.2%, but in terms of reach rankings across the world, the UK is in fourth position on that one. Twitter, newsletters is kind of, we already mentioned email marketing before, but newsletters, there's been a couple of reports on this, not just from Twitter, but around kind of monetizing newsletters. They have acquired an app called Review. I think that's how you say it. Haven't tried it yet, haven't looked at it, but that is a feature. Have you tried it?
Yeah, I've used Review before it got bought by Twitter, but I think the really interesting thing here is like what I class as the rise of private communities, because with, like, we talked about it last month, right, where LinkedIn have offered the ability for you to run your own newsletter and have subscribers to your newsletter on LinkedIn, for example. So what this kind of tells me is that Twitter's taking a similar path on this. And there's another platform that has grown at an incredible rate. Whilst it's not technically social media, so we won't talk about it right now, but the product is called Substack. It's a newsletter platform. Definitely recommend anyone who's like big on newsletters or long form content to check out Substack. It's growing at a ridiculous rate. But the point is here is that rise of private communities. Let's say you're active on Twitter, for example, and you have maybe 1,000 followers. 500 of them, for argument's sake, will be not a community as such. They'll be like people that casually maybe follow you, maybe look at your content, or they've just collected followers over time. But interestingly, within your follower base, there's going to be a core fan base within that. And that for me is where the heartland of your community is. And the kind of rise of private communities like I'm talking about here allows you, through these kind of newsletter and kind of subscription opportunities now being offered by LinkedIn and now Twitter, allows you to now actually have a more kind of private kind of community within your broader following base. So this allows you to have those newsletters, publish that, and have absolute certainty that that message will go to your subscribers. Now, can't guarantee whether I read it or not, but the fact is, like, newsletters allow you not to be beholden to an algorithm as to whether your content's going to be seen. So this is great for your more kind of like passionate fans, your more ardent followers, I would say. So actually, I really like this as a potential concept and a direction for where social media could be going broadly.
Yeah, it's going to be good. Interesting. A comment has just, we're going to go through the comments in a minute, but someone has said that their Twitter account has been revitalized by the pandemic and Clubhouse. So let's talk about, we won't talk too much about Clubhouse, but yeah, because people are using other social media platforms to drive to and from Clubhouse and use it as their way to interact. And probably not surprising, Facebook have been reported to do this as well. Twitter are improving their audio spaces and going after Clubhouse. I think for me, this is much more about not the platform, but the feature of audio, how we're engaging with audio only. Perhaps we don't want to be on screen all day, and how we're using that. So I think that's also something really interesting. Always is to see how the the established platforms respond to the new boys and girls and what they're going to do. But interesting how, again, these platforms are all working together to drive traffic and conversations between each other.
Indeed, yeah, and I'm fascinated to learn more about like how a Twitter account's been revitalized by Clubhouse, actually. So Luann, if you head off to the chat and start engaging in some of that stuff, for the last kind of 5 to 10 minutes, I'm going to fire through some kind of quick fires on some platforms that aren't often spoken about or might not be part of your strategy, just so that you're kind of fully briefed on it. So Pinterest is growing really well. As we know, Pinterest skews very heavily female. They're actually growing faster quarter on quarter than any other network at the moment. So Pinterest is having a whale of a time, basically. Here's your demographic information. Pinterest is an underutilized platform in the UK, especially, I would say, it's especially suited for your kind of B2C or more retail orientated opportunities. But there's a lot of e-commerce functions available within it. We speak about it most months. But their revenues have been going up and up as a result. And that is as a result of these heightened e-commerce functions, the fact that people can run their shops, their online shops on Pinterest. And it's having as I said, like a booming time at the moment. YouTube, not much to share other than the importance of shorts. Nothing, this is more of an FYI for you at the moment. This is like every other social platform that copies each other. This is their approach to TikTok, short video up to 58 seconds, could provide a potentially more easier entrance into the world of YouTube video for many people that might not be active on YouTube. So, kind of reduces the reliance on kind of long videos into kind of more shorter, snappy, more kind of social media befitting content. Shorts is not available to everyone yet, only certain creators over 10,000 followers in the main. So that rules most mere mortals out. But they are betting big on this. So expect to see more on this coming because they've been talking this one up at the moment. Snapchat. The media don't talk about Snapchat much, but my word, they've had a unbelievable year. So they're grown incredibly quickly, 65 million in the last quarter. So growing quicker than even Instagram here, skewing more female. And actually, really only Pinterest and Snapchat are the only two platforms that really have a majorly female bias, which I think is actually an interesting point to consider in our strategies. And Snapchat's interesting because the demographics are starting to split. Look at that. There isn't the audience between 18 to 34 is bigger than your kind of teenager audience, which typically would have been like the casual throwaway comment about Snapchat before, like, oh, that's just for teenagers or whatever. Actually, it's not. It's clearly not. So, and you're starting to see actually a big swathe of individuals in the kind of older end of the spectrum now that are joining Snapchat. And most of this growth is as a result of this new feature. It's called Spotlight. And like every other platform, it's Snapchat's approach to TikTok. Who'd have thunk it? So yeah, 100 million active users this has now received. It's kind of been Snapchat's renaissance, if you will. It's not like they ever shrunk massively, but they added 16 million users, 62% revenue growth, 265 million people log in every single day. For kind of daily usage, Snapchat is absolutely massive. And it's one of those things, and it's tempting to think, all right, it's another platform to think about for my strategy. Snapchat really has some kind of clear benefits, I would say, and I think considering it's not going away anytime soon, it's definitely one to consider. Now, here's everyone's favorite one to debate: TikTok. We don't get the growth statistics on this one. Actually skews slightly male, but it's pretty balanced in terms of its demographic. We don't have any other kind of, the information's a bit more private in TikTok, to be honest. They're doing some interesting partnerships. They've done a partnership with Universal Music. So this really, TikTok's going to start to become the future of the music video. So this is, whilst for most people that doesn't actually matter too much, I think it's actually a really interesting dynamic, and it's going to show if that, all of these partnerships they're doing increase the amount of daily active users and increase the utility of TikTok as like a day-to-day resource where people get their news and entertainment. The more that people flock on a daily basis, the more important this becomes to our kind of content strategies. Because there's so much changing, they've launched this seller university. So for anyone that's wanting to think about TikTok and interested in considering it, this is definitely something to consider, right? The seller university, because e-commerce is now a huge part of it. We're going to talk about e-commerce more in just a second. Only got a couple more slides to share, but this actually shows how progressive TikTok is. TikTok are rather. they've partnered with this recipe app called Whisk. Now, that in itself is not too important, but the methodology behind it is really important to consider. So let's kind of play this out a little bit. Food oriented content has always been very popular on social, particularly on TikTok, right? So someone preparing a recipe in a 15-second video. Now, what you'll see, and it's very hard to see, but I'm hovering my mouse over it, where you've got a little link to see full recipe. So this allows someone, whilst the kind of feed is still going on, to just nip off to somewhere else, save the recipe, and basically kind of like take a call to action off that content through that partnership with this recipe app. Now, for most people, that kind of recipe app is going to be irrelevant to your strategy. But the important thing is that the way that TikTok are thinking about calls to action in content is very interesting. Because if you think about calls to action in typical social content, is pretty old school, right? Like how we'd promote this event. I'd put out a post on LinkedIn saying, join Luann and myself for our monthly event. Here's a link. Put the link in the comments, for example. That's a pretty bad experience, right? Because someone's got to find the link, click on it, opening up a new tab, do whatever they need to, and then remember to go back to LinkedIn. This kind of call to action process within TikTok and what they're working on here allows someone to look at something, go, oh, that's interesting. Take a call to action that's embedded into the content itself, take the action that they need and carry on scrolling again. And now that, for me, is like a really progressive approach to how you can kind of add value whilst collecting, whilst getting people to take an action you want. So I think it's really important. I promised I'll talk about e-commerce, and I promised I'll stop talking in about a minute's time. 2 more slides. Live streamed e-commerce, like in December, Walmart, I mean, they're the most progressive ones on TikTok. But Walmart in December did a live stream with a couple of influencers, allowing people to buy products directly whilst they were talking and wearing these clothes and whatever. So whilst this isn't available for us mere mortals right now, but it just goes to show the direction of travel. And this kind of harks back to what we said right at the start of this. Live stream e-commerce is going to be such a massive thing, and TikTok is going to be central to this. A really interesting dynamic shift. And all of these dynamics are changing, right? From Boohoo's acquisition of Debenhams, what's happening with the high street, the way that we're going to be procuring things, and how the fashion industry will work, and all other industries are going to change dramatically as a result of the events over the last year. So much to change, so much to think about as this grows. You can't apply this to your strategies tomorrow, but it's definitely something to begin thinking about. And one point to leave you with as a last kind of case study is that I was reading this last week or a couple of weeks ago, and I thought this was really, really interesting. For me, this is like the future of social. Now, Walmart do have some shady business practices, so I'm going to brush them under the carpet for now. And because in isolation, this is a really good thing. So Walmart have about 800,000 stores across the United States. Each of those stores has an owner. And what they've done is turned that owner into an ambassador of Walmart and have created a whole program to enable these 800,000 stores to become Walmart's own influencers. Walmart fully cognizant of the fact that despite how big their singular social channels are, for the main corporate channels, it dwarfs in size and the power of the broader organization and the influence of the broader organization. If you Google this, like inside Walmart's army of TikTok influencers, you'll find the reading on this. It's very progressive. But for me, it's like the future of social media for business. And that takes us to our summary. So what can we learn from all of this? Kind of 7 points to take away. Platforms are changing all the time. New demographics, usage is shifting, new features. Be open-minded in your channel approach. If you didn't consider Snapchat before, it didn't work for you, that doesn't mean it's not going to work for you in the future. Open-mindedness is key here. The rise of owned communities. I spoke about this in the context of Twitter's newsletters and LinkedIn's newsletters and Substack. We're going to see more and more kind of more private communities happen. So we've seen the rise of that through Facebook groups over the past, but this is the evolution of that. The importance of multi-channel. We always talk about it, right? And making sure your message is distributed as far as wide as it can be based on where you believe your audience are. The way people are discovering products is changing, leaning towards social. Like we said, 66% growth in discovery of products through social in the last 4 years. The way people are promoting products is changing. Like let's take, Walmart's TikTok influencers, for example. The way people are buying products is changing, like we saw with Shopify, Shop Pay, and like we've just been seeing with live stream e-commerce. And the final thing to mention, which we hadn't talked about here, but is the final data point, is like humanizing and differentiating through purpose. Over the last year, more than a quarter of people have bought a product online due to a company's values. So beyond all of this and all the changes and all the newfangled stuff, it remains inherently human. And the more that you can emphasize your values, what drives you, the more power that you'll have in social. And even a business the size of Walmart can recognize that and the power of the individual behind it. And that is that. We are there.
We are there. Let's just go through the questions and then we can do the close. There's not huge questions. I'm just posting in the chat the link to the full 350 odd slides, but there is also, when you look at that link, there is other reports by country and different quarters as well. So the link is in there for you. Really just a few comments on here, Andy. The slide at the beginning around brand research and search and social, where would we put YouTube? Would we put it in search or would we put it in social media?
Oh, what a brilliant question. I would actually put that more in search, I would say, but it really blurs the line because, you know, they recently announced hashtags and they've got hashtag pages now on YouTube. So there is a social element, there's subscribers, there's followers. But to be honest, the way I would research this, the way I would plan for it would be the way I'd plan for like an SEO first strategy, right? So yeah, I would agree. It's more SEO, more search. Yeah.
A number of people put both, and I'm going to go with the both because, again, I might split it up by that customer journey of if you're searching, your search intent is just quite broad. It may be a search engine. If it's narrower, it's how to, it's engaging, it's webinars, then perhaps more social. Another comment, mainly around the demographics or that we show for Facebook, was has Facebook got cool again?
I'm not too sure anyone who picks a fight with the Australian government and picks a fight with Apple is cool necessarily. But it's not disappearing anytime soon. People like to talk the fact that is Facebook dying? It's definitely not. And when it connects this many people across the world, it's kind of compelling that you don't want to miss out. So naturally, you're going to create a Facebook account. So yeah. I think cool's a stretch, but it's not going anywhere.
I don't know if cool is one of those words, depending on the age groups that everyone's been posting down the side in here. And that kind of brings us on. You've just answered it really, is our Facebook groups dead? And I would agree, they're not. It kind of comes, it's a different meaning of the word purpose, isn't it? And people having this intent and purpose of why they're doing something, to have a plan around it is whether it's going to live or die. And if you don't have a plan and you're just, dipping your toes in and don't really know why you're doing something, you're not going to get results. But if you have a plan and intent and purpose to what you're doing, then you will get answers. Similar to LinkedIn groups, I think LinkedIn groups have a bit more functionality issues and history around it, but they could work. And I do see some LinkedIn groups work very well if they've set up, got a clear purpose, and they're managed very well. But I'm just going to fire one thing at you, which I thought was a really useful comment and something we don't address, is looking at your Google Analytics and where your traffic comes from in terms of social and quality indicators around that. My take is, you could get loads of traffic from Facebook, but if they disappear really quickly and don't stick around, it's a vanity thing. So I think that was a really good point around looking at Google Analytics to actually tie these stats and the picture together for you. So
definitely. Anna, I'm going to go on this point there actually. I know, changing the subject slightly, about well-managed Facebook groups are brilliant. Absolutely. This whole private community thing, the smaller knit communities of engaged people is where it's at. So yeah, well-managed is the key word, and it's very hard to breathe life into Facebook groups. That's for sure. That's a whole skill set in itself. But yeah, absolutely agree with the importance of that.
Google Analytics.
Yeah. Cool. So I've just got two things to share very, very quickly. I'm just going to pop in two links. Sorry if it's hard to read. The first link I've just popped in there is next month's session. If you want to book in, we're doing it more towards the afternoon because be a bit fairer to our US audience rather than making them get up at 6 a.m. or earlier. So that's not fair. So yeah, slightly later on. But if you want to book in for March, you can get that done. Also, there's a link to the strategy sessions that I run if you ever want to like dive in specifically on social media strategy without all of the kind of dreamland stuff that we've been talking about and all the trends and all of the changes. If you just want to talk about strategy stuff, I run 2 sessions a week where you can just, talk social media strategy with myself. So with that, any more questions at all?
No more questions, but I'm going to be a bit of a fangirl here and prompt you to tell people about the event that you've got tomorrow. Is it tomorrow?
Right. Yeah, it is tomorrow. It is tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, we've been privileged to partner with Anne Handley. If you're not aware of that, and if you look up Anne Handley, she's a hero of mine, Luann's, and just unbelievable B2B marketer. She runs Marketing Profs. She is a force of nature. We're so thrilled to be doing a webinar with her, doing that tomorrow. We've got 1,000 people registered for it, so it's ridiculous. So
very exciting. I highly recommend a watch and read her content. So I'm really pleased for you doing it.
I'll pop it on LinkedIn as well. So if anyone's like popped in their LinkedIn link to their profile, we'll I'll connect with you all, and I'll put out a little post on LinkedIn in a bit. I'll follow up. There'll be a follow-up email actually for everyone with the recording, the slides, and a link to that session tomorrow as well if you want to join. But yes, yeah.
Thank you. So many amazing comments in there. Thank you for joining us and kind of we've kind of got one eye on the chat. So just the fact that we know that there's people there watching us chat and discuss and debate the data is really useful for us as well. So thank you.
Amazing. Yeah, I agree. So, and the fact that Eric's just called you a force of nature as well. So
I've known him a long time. Thank you, Eric.
Amazing. Thank you so much for the brilliant interaction. Thank you for making this session what it is. We've had another record turnout. So I will, we'll see you next month. So thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.